t-shirt. Okay. Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Rebecca. Welcome. Today we are going to be discussing another episode of Hulu's Only Murders in the Building. This is obviously one of my favorite shows. We talk about it every week. So if you are new here and haven't seen, I have videos for every season, including 1, 2, 3, and the current season, number 4. And we are currently going to talk about episode 5, but if you're not all caught up, then go back, check out the other videos where I discuss different clues and theories for every single episode. If you haven't watched episode 5 yet, do not watch this video because it is full spoiler and I don't want to spoil anything for you. Before we get into the video, if you like this kind of content, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all those YouTube-y things. It really helps. I'm trying to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of this year, and every little bit helps, whether you share it with a friend who is also interested in the show or you leave a comment about who you think the murderer is. All of it helps. I love you guys so much. You're the best. And let's get into season 4, episode 5. Adaptation. So first of all, adaptation, like all the other episodes of this season, is a movie, a real life movie, and it's actually written by Charlie Kaufman, which is kind of a topic of today's episode because we see that Marshall is pretty inspired by Charlie Kaufman as a writer. Marshall is like the screenwriter for the upcoming movie that the trio are going to have made about them. And so Adaptation is a movie about Charlie Kaufman. It's about him and it's written by him, so it's a bit meta. And so basically the movie is about Charlie Kaufman being hired to write an adaptation of The Orchid Thief, which is a book. And when we go into the movie, Charlie has a twin brother whose name is Donald, who also decides he wants to be a screenwriter. Charlie gets a case of writer's block after realizing that the book that he's trying to turn into a movie cannot be adapted into a movie because he just feels the plot doesn't work for it. He decides to go talk to the author, whose name is Orlean and whose last name is Orlean, so we're just going to call them Orlean, who is played by Meryl Streep, who we know is obviously Loretta. And he gets too anxious in person to be able to speak to her, so his twin brother pretends to be him and speaks to Orlean, asks her a bunch of questions. They think that the author's responses are suspicious, so they follow her to Florida, where she meets John LaRoche, who is the orchid-stealing protagonist of her book, and also her secret lover. And it's basically revealed that the author and the lover have in their possession a mind-altering drug that causes, they said fascination on Wikipedia. I don't know if that's like obsession or interest. But so he has this like serum from a specific kind of orchid that causes this fascination. And then once they realize, the author and her lover find out that Charlie has been watching them and has seen that they have this drug, they decide that he must die. So then the end of the movie kind of goes that they're like driven to this swamp and his brother Donald ends up dying, not Charlie. And he ends up being shot, but that doesn't kill him. He's shot and then their car crashes and he goes through a window. And Charlie ends up finishing his book. So it's a bit tricky, a bit of a complicated plot because I haven't seen the movie. If you have and you have anything to add, make sure to comment it down below. But so that's the general gist. I think it's interesting that this is another situation where we see doubles because we've got Charlie and his twin brother Donald, who I think in reality doesn't exist, but just exists within this like movie plot. And then we have this topic of killing someone to keep something under wraps. And we're pretty sure that that's what happened with SAZZ. So making some connections here. So let's get into the actual episode. Marshall, the screenwriter, is the narrator of this episode, and we pretty much immediately learn that he's got imposter syndrome and he pretends to be someone that he's not. So we see that he has a fake beard and fake sideburns, which we later learn is because he feels like that's what a screenwriter is supposed to look like. He has that picture of Charlie Kaufman on his bedside table as well as his book, and so he even puts on the glasses to kind of give more of a Charlie-esque vibe. Marshall says that he can quote David Foster Wallace and Ace Ventura. David Foster Wallace is an American novelist and writer who wrote Infinite Jest. And Ace Ventura is a very silly movie about a pet detective. So two very different things that he mentions. It makes sense because he's a writer, a screenwriter, to mention that he can quote a famous novelist. But it's a bit strange that he says that he can quote Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, because this is a movie about a man who is a detective for missing pets. He is working on a case for the Miami Dolphins, who have a missing mascot. While he's working on looking for the mascot, the players begin to go missing. And in the end, we basically learn that the villain is a disgraced former NFL kicker from the team who missed the winning kick and later altered his appearance and joined the police force to get revenge on the team for, I guess, him not being on it anymore. And he also blamed everyone else for missing that kick. So it's interesting here that we have another thing that's about pets. We've had Pet Cemetery. We've had Hammy Faye Bacon, who is the pig that they found. We've had Gravy, the cadaver dog. So we have a lot of pets this season, as well as like pet allusions to pets. And I just think that's interesting, and I wonder if that will play into the season overall. Like the first season, everything had to do with that ring and finding jewelry, and then we learn that Theo and Teddy are grave robbers. So does this have something to do with like black market pets or pets going missing, stealing pets and selling them to the highest bidder? Like what's going on here? Why are there so many mentions of pets? Or is this a red herring? So back to Marshall. He basically says that everything is about convincing the world and yourself that you have the goods. And we see that he has a note on his desk on the mirror that says, Intro to Joel and Clementine, the relationship, the procedure, inner workings of memory, discovering the truth, escaping the procedure, resolution. And I looked this up because I didn't know what this was, but if you are a fan of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, you may have immediately known what this was. And so this is another reference to a movie called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which features Jim Carrey, who also plays Ace Ventura in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. So that's two Jim Carrey references. But it features Joel, who's played by Jim Carrey, and his girlfriend Clementine. And Clementine undergoes a procedure to erase her memories of Joel because they're not in a happy relationship and she doesn't want to remember him anymore. He decides to undergo the same procedure once he learns that she has now forgotten him. And about midway through, realizes that he's in love with her and he doesn't want to forget her. So there's like a piece of his mind that holds onto a sliver of memory where she's telling him to meet her in Montauk. So he forgets her, she forgets him, but he has this like sliver of memory. He decides to go to Montauk and ends up running into her. There's also separately a disgruntled employee who ships out all of the company's files to the clients to let them know that they've undergone this procedure, because once they've done it, they don't know they've done it. And he meets Clementine, they're drawn to each other, they basically like fall back in love, only to receive the tapes from this company and realize that they didn't get along, that their relationship had a lot of hardships to it, and they almost break up but decide to stay together in the end, based on like the happiness that they had together. So that's kind of a summary of the movie itself, but it's interesting that there's once again talk about reality, what's true versus what's not true. Like in reality, they had this whole relationship together. They were, maybe dating for years, but then that memory was removed from their minds. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So it's like their reality versus what actually happened. So it's interesting to see that there's more references to this, and also curious to know why Marshall had this written as on a note on his mirror at all, and what that has to do with Only Murders in the Building. Next, we're looking around Joel's room. There's a lot of clues in the first couple of scenes, so bear with me. We see a movie poster that says Michelangelo Antonioni's first English language film, and if you look this up, his first English language film was Blow Up, which is the title of the next episode. Episode 6 of this season. Obviously we haven't seen it yet, but it's interesting that they're already alluding to it. and it's a picture. The poster is a red background with a woman, and she's duplicated a bunch of times. So another situation where there are multiples, duplicates. Interesting. So if we look up Blow Up and the summary, we see that it is about a fashion photographer who goes to photograph a couple in the park. He's just doing his thing. He's taking his pictures. The couple doesn't know. They haven't given him permission. He's taking photos of them in the park. And when he goes to leave, the woman comes up to him, argues with him. She's like, give me that film. I don't want you to have it. He basically tells her to get lost. He goes home. He blows up the film. And later on, he sees that there's actually a shooter hidden in the bushes ready to murder either one member of the couple or both members. He goes back to the park and finds that there's a body there, but leaves when he hears twigs snapping because he gets freaked out. And the rest of the film kind of follows him trying to get someone to come with him to see the body. And then when he gets back to the park, it's gone, it's disappeared. And so it's another film that is questioning reality. Did he really see a body? Did someone really die? Is someone messing with him? What's going on here? Is this man sane? Is he crazy? What is reality moment? So that's Blow Up. So as we spoke about, Charlie is trying to be and look like Charlie Kaufman. We see Marshall like before the movie has even been officially created. He's writing it. He sends it off to Bev Mellon, and she's in her office reading over his screenwriting and calls him to give him the news that she does indeed want to make it into a movie. And while we're in her office, we see Ice Age 2, Garfield 2, and Rio 2, these 3 movie posters on her wall. And this is interesting because it's possible that the fact that they're all the second in the series has to do with the fact that we're looking for, multiple killers. Is this a clue here that it's 2 people that's done it instead of 1? I'm thinking yes, that this alludes to another version of doubles, another version of 2. So Marshall says that he thinks that becoming a writer will make his imposter syndrome go away, but he says that once he actually is approved to be the screenwriter for this movie, it doesn't go away at all. So that's kind of our official first look at Marshall and who he is, kind of getting a little bit of a deeper look at his life. Then we move to Bev and the trio. We obviously ended off last episode with Bev pointing a gun at the trio and saying she was going to shoot their fucking brains out. We learned pretty quickly that Bev didn't know it was them, was just freaked out, grabbed a gun that she found in the shed and said that she didn't even think it was loaded. And then she proceeds to shoot it at the ceiling, and it, goes off a bunch of times, which is similar to Eva Longoria's scene where she pulls Rudy's fake gun off the wall and tries to shoot him. So it's kind of like a parallel there. Bev basically says that it's SAZZ's gun, that she's just been nervous, and she also believes that somebody on set killed SAZZ because she got a phone call from SAZZ the night that she was murdered that basically said there was something wrong with her movie, that SAZZ had information that she needed to tell Bev, and Bev ignored it at the time because she didn't want to hear any negatives about the movie. She was just really excited to have it getting going, but she officially believes that someone on the movie set killed SAZZ to keep the movie alive and moving forward. In the opening credits of the show, we see footprints, which is, I guess, the little clue for today. Bev tells the trio that she was in LA at Variety's Power Women party in the Power Room when she got the call from SAZZ, and Bev lets us know that this took place right at 11:07, which is when SAZZ left, right before SAZZ left to go get the wine. Bev explains to the trio that she wanted to figure out what the problem SAZZ was talking about was and fix it before it destroyed her production, because it's very hard to get movies made, and so that's why she was snooping around. She also says she's happy that the trio are hunting for the killer, and she says, "You guys find the killer, I'll find the problem with the production, and I'll fix it." Charles shows Detective D his murder boards. She calls it amateur hour, but he points out that the trio have bested the NYPD 3 times already, which is totally true. And Charles basically has a theory that SAZZ found a problem with the movie, so someone on the movie set killed her in order to keep the problem quiet and have the movie continue on. This is the same theory that Bev had. That's probably where he got it from. Oliver and Mabel appear, and apparently Jack Jonk is playing Loretta's love interest this season. That is who that like arm wrapped around her shoulder was. So this is a continuation of the problem Oliver was having with his relationship with Loretta, the insecurities he was having, and we're continuing to talk about it. I don't know if it's like genuinely relevant to the killer, but it is this like side plot that's happening that may end up being relevant in the end. We see that the trio has officially received their life rights checks, and Mabel says she can't believe that they're actually getting paid for this, and she kind of asks like, what am I? Like, what am I being paid for? And Charles says, you're a podcast producer. Like, that's what we're doing here. That's what we've been doing. Mabel is discovering herself as a podcast producer and as a professional and kind of like moving into this new role. The trio head to the production office to do some research while Detective D gets info on the gun that they found at SAZZ's shed. We also hear Detective D tell the trio to tighten it up, which is interesting because Bev says the same thing in the shed. She says something along the lines of, can I have the gun? That way I can tell people to tighten up Act 2 and they'll actually listen to me. So that's 2 mentions of tighten it up in one episode. And I don't think that anything the writers do is a coincidence or a mistake. I think that maybe it's another example of a duo, like having them repeat the same phrase over again, or maybe tighten it up is a clue that we need to look a little bit more into. So we walk into the brothers, sisters, and they say they're having a photo shoot, and they decide that the OGs, the trio, should participate. They say that the concept is doubles and illusions, which obviously we know from the last few episodes has been a big theme throughout the season. We also see that one of the sisters has a very long case that they wheel into the elevator, and I think that this is a red herring for being a gun or making the sisters look suspicious as being one of the shooters, and they zoom in on it very obviously. We hear more about Jack Jonk. He's a big name during this episode, and Oliver becomes even more insecure, saying that, you know, he's a Herculean figure and that he has a great body and he, you know, can do athletic things, and everyone's kind of like, okay, bro, whatever you say. So he did also mention that he's usually picked second when being picked for softball teams, another reference to 2. We discover that Howard is now working on the set with the brothers, sisters. Like they said, they wanted to nurture him. So he is officially, I don't know what his job is. He's just like the guy who goes to get coffee and take care of the needs of everyone. And we learned that Eva has donated a bunch of like sticky pads for the floor to keep the dust out of the space. We also learned that she is big in adhesives, including boob tape and wound glue. I thought that wound glue was just like an interesting thing to mention, considering we have shooting and murder and death. Will that come to be something we need to know about in the future? So we have Charles walking around the room trying to take photos of everyone for the murder board. He's pretending to be on a phone call and he's like taking pictures. And then Mabel says something along the lines of like, I really hope that the camera is facing the right way. And immediately Charles has to go and fix it because he's been taking photos of his own ear. Then the trio spot Marshall and he immediately runs away from them and is really relieved to find out that he's actually a suspect because he thought that they were going to ask him about rewrites. They go off saying that they need to question Marshall, and Bev stops Mabel and basically talks to her about her career and connecting her to other people that Bev knows. And Mabel's really uncertain about this because she does not have an elevator pitch ready, and she just recently decided that she's a podcast producer. So she doesn't have anything for Bev's next movie, and she is kind of like trying to figure out where she is and like how to not. She also feels like she has imposter syndrome. She doesn't feel like she is a podcast producer. She doesn't feel like she's worthy of giving Bev these ideas. So that's kind of where Mabel's at. Charles and Oliver go to Charles's apartment to talk to Marshall, and we see Glenn is dropping off some soda bread to his apartment. And I thought this was interesting because Glenn doesn't know Charles. He doesn't know the trio. He only recently met them. So it's interesting that he automatically knows where Charles's apartment is. And although this could be nothing, I do think it's suspicious that he knows exactly which apartment is Charles's when he's never been there before. Or has he? We also learned that either Glenn has terrible eyesight or continuing his stint of being crazy, he just doesn't have a grasp on reality because he sees Marshall and automatically assumes that Marshall is Mabel and that she's grown a beard. And the guys have to be like, this isn't Mabel. This is like a completely different human. And Glenn kind of is just like, oh, whatever. And then we have another point where Oliver asks Glenn if he's physically fit, and Glenn says, yes, you're a regular Conor McGregor, who is an Irish mixed martial artist. And so Conor McGregor is like super buff and strong, and Oliver is obviously Oliver. So the question continues, does Glenn have terrible eyesight, or is he just delusional? If it's the former and he has terrible eyesight, then we can rule him out as being the shooter, because there's no way he would be able to shoot from the Dudenoff apartment and be able to hit anyone when he can't even see the people standing right in front of him. Either way, it's very interesting, and I think that's kind of what they were trying to play at, was like, Glenn can't be the shooter because he can't see for shit. He also mentions that he's going to be a part of the photo shoot, that he's going to be a double for Oliver, and he gets into the elevator and immediately starts stomping rats. Rats that aren't real. So we move into the apartment. We've got the full trio there. They're questioning Marshall, and Charles compliments Marshall's writing, and Mabel sends Oliver off to print some of the photos that Charles took so they can put them on their murder board. We see that Oliver is described as a septuagenarian Peter Pan, or a male Tinkerbell, which he doesn't like, but is totally true in the way he flits around the room. And Marshall says that he was at a stand-up club the night that SAZZ died, and so there's no way that he would have been able to kill her. Mabel also goes on to ask if Marshall's beard is fake, which we obviously know it is. And he admits that he wears it because he has imposter syndrome and he wants to look like a real writer. Then he takes his glasses off and he says he has 20/10 vision and that he actually doesn't need the glasses at all. I think this is another hint, because having 20/10 vision would mean that you would be a great shooter and would definitely be able to hit someone from the Dudenoff apartment. But I do wonder if Marshall is too obvious of a suspect at this point, because he has his own full episode and monologue. I just think that it's too soon for them to be pointing out who the murderer is when it's only episode 5. So I do feel like Marshall is a red herring. Mabel goes on to talk to Marshall and say that she really relates to him because she currently feels like an imposter. And he says that that's what... I scout. And Marshall says that that's what he loves about the trio, is that they're never afraid to be themselves and that they are amateurs flailing their way to success. And then he says that they haven't missed yet. So once again, they are showing Marshall their murder board, and they're talking about the who, the how, the why, and the why now, which is what Detective D taught them in the first season. Now, the only thing that they really have is the how. But even that is a little bit unclear, considering Charles's timeline doesn't make a lot of sense. And Marshall points that out and says that to kill someone between 11:07 and 11:19, to shoot them and then run across the hall and clean up the body and dump it into the incinerator, the person would have to be extremely athletic, extremely strong, extremely fast. And so it's just a very tight timeline for someone to be able to get from the West Wing to the East Wing so quickly. So Charles obviously does his imaginary breakdown of what happened the night of the murder, and Oliver volunteers to remake the murder in 12 minutes to prove his athletic prowess and also to prove that it's possible. So we see Oliver racing around the building, sliding down the stair post, screaming at children, and being screamed at by this man who is actually John McEnroe. Oliver races into the apartment and is like, did I do it? And Mabel's like, it's been 38 minutes. So, no. So Charles is officially pretty upset because his timeline is all off and he just can't quite figure it out right now. Lester brings up the wardrobe for the photo shoot and mentions Robert Mapplethorpe and says that he modeled with him. And Robert Mapplethorpe is a famous photographer. We've had a lot of mentions of photography in this episode, so we know that it's important, something to do with like photography, shooting, a shooter having to like line up the shot and have someone stand on their mark, but also someone being like a mark, like for a shooter. There's a lot of parallels there. Mabel says that they have to go to the photo shoot because she found she took a picture earlier from the like sticky stuff that Eva Longoria put on the floor, and they have a shoe print match. So they need to go and find out whose shoe it belongs to. As the trio walk into the space, one of the sisters says this could be triggering, and the other says shoot, which, like I just said, photography and guns and shooting, this is all kind of like comedic, I guess, in the parallels, and also possibly an allusion to the shooting at the end of the episode. We see that the doubles theme is taken to a trio theme, and they have mirrors. So Bev says, isn't it cool? It's so confusing, just like your podcast. So we've got Zach Galifianakis, we've got Eugene Levy, we've got Eva Longoria, we've got the original trio, we've got the stunt doubles, and then we've got all these mirrors. So it's multiplied to like an enormous amount. Glenn calls Zach Mr. Anaphylaxis, which I thought was hysterical. So now he's not Zach Fragilistic anymore. He's Zach Anaphylaxis. Eva throws a fit to get the sticky mats to be laid out for Mabel because she needs to be able to see whose shoe print is whose. Then we have this pivotal point where Charles is getting his makeup touched up and runs into Eugene, and they can't quite get by each other. They start to do this like back and forth dance, and that is when Charles realizes that it's not one killer, but two. And so we see the cogs kind of moving in his head. Marshall sees the interaction, and he also sees this like realization come into Charles's mind. And as this is all going on, we zoom in, and who has the same shoe as the shooter but Tawny. And so she tells Trina that Oliver is off his mark and to move him. Trina picks him up and moves him over. And immediately we're thinking, is it the brothers, sisters, who are both shooter and cleanup crew and are actually the murderers? And then we look up and Tawny has actually disappeared. And then we hear a gunshot and everything goes black. We hear someone say, oh my God, they've been shot. So this is another kind of like big cliffhanger to end on. Last episode we had Bev Mellon pointing a gun at the trio, and this episode we have what we currently think is Tawny shooting up the production studio, but obviously there's no way to know. So now we're going to talk about my theories for this episode. I do think that because we are about halfway through, we are coming up on the time when we should be able to identify who the killer is. So I've written down all of the options, but the first thing we need to know, obviously, is that there are two killers. I really don't think it can be Trina and Tawny because they literally just gave that to us, so that's too obvious. I don't think that it can be Marshall because I think that's too obvious. Then we've got Howard, Lester, Jan, Marshall, who I just mentioned, Glenn, Loretta, Zach, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, Eugene Levy, Eva Longoria, Trina and Tawny, Bev Mellon, Vince Fish, Rudy Inez Anna, and Papa Sauce, whose name I forget, and Scott Bakula. So these are all the people who have been more prominent in this season and who I think could possibly be the murderers. Now, obviously, I have just named everyone, and so let me kind of like bring it back for you. So like I said, I don't think that the duo can be Trina and Tawny. So we're going to scratch them off as like the doubles. I don't think that Marshall's involved. I don't think that Howard, Lester, or Jan are involved. I think that Lester just doesn't have enough going on for him. And I think Howard, they're going to want to keep around until season 5. So I don't think that he's going to be the murderer. Then we've got Glenn Stubbins, who I think could be a very viable option. I don't think that Loretta's the murderer. She's not in this season enough. Is it possible? Yes, but she's low on my suspect list. And then we've got the 3 actors who I think they could be involved. We've got Bev Mellon, who I think she could be involved. Vince, Rudy, Inez, and Anna, I think they're too obvious, like we already covered them earlier in the season. They already made them look like really big suspects, so I don't think it's any of them. And then Scott Bakula, who's barely been in this season. So my biggest suspects are Glenn Stubbins, one of the brothers, sisters, not both, one of the actors, Bev Mellon, and that's it. So I've got maybe 4 or 5 people who I think could have done it. Okay, now for the theories section of the video. Sorry, I had to like get up and take a little break because my camera overheated, so let's do this fast. So the first theory is that there is a secret couple that have worked together to murder SAZZ. The reason I think this is because we've had a couple of episodes that have mentioned either movies that are mainly about couples or shows, like theater shows that are about couples, and it's like couples that don't really get along, couples that aren't really good for each other, couples that encourage bad behavior or cheating. Specifically, they mentioned Sweetie Todd and Mrs. Levitt, a couple where Sweetie Todd murders people and Mrs. Levitt bakes them into pies. So if you want to hear more about that theory, go listen to my last few videos. There's also a theory about one of the actors doing it because of the Ham episode, Ham Radio, Ham being mentioned a lot, and a ham being someone who is like very like boisterous and like hamming it up like an actor. There's also this blurred line between fiction and reality, which has been mentioned in The Stuntman, Blow Up, which we see in Glenn, which we've seen a lot throughout the past couple of episodes. So with that being said, I think that there's a possibility that maybe there's an actor who felt that they needed a real murder in order to get into character or like truly have the movie become real to them. So they murdered SAZZ in order to like do their best job acting and have a successful movie. And I think that that could be a likely theory, someone who's literally just like crazy and did it so that they could be a success and a star and get more publicity for the movie overall. Because the death definitely encourages people to look at the movie and the podcast because it's current, it's happening right now, etc. I talked about this last episode. Okay, there's a train going by, but we're just gonna have to keep trucking through. There's a theory about a potential cold case. I spoke about this last video, so definitely go check that out. But there's an episode last season where SAZZ brings in a cold case of beer and she says, I've got a cold case for you guys. And she's obviously talking about the Belgian lager that she has. But people have started to theorize that it's possible that SAZZ really did uncover a potential cold case and that someone killed her to keep it under wraps. Maybe it's something she discovered in the West Wing, but I definitely could see that being a possibility, especially because the Belgian lager was on the end credits for one of the episodes. So I could see a cold case being something relevant to either this season or the next season. So one of the theories that I got from this episode is that I believe that Glenn is one of the murderers. And I'm thinking that it might be Glenn and Tawny or one of the twins. So my theory is that Glenn is romantically involved with one of the twins or possibly an actor like Eva Longoria or even Bev. And Glenn wanted revenge on Charles and the trio for allowing Ben to die last season. And so he planned to kill Charles, and the plan went awry when he accidentally shot SAZZ instead, but he had someone else be the shooter, his girlfriend who's supporting his, evil deeds. And then he came in and he cleaned up the body and all of that. So I feel like Glenn could definitely be involved, especially with his inability to really understand what reality is, especially with his constant stomping of the rats and this idea that he has some sort of negative connotation with last season, whether it be trauma from the fact that Ben was killed, whether it be that he is Ben and that Ben and Glenn swapped places and Glenn really died, which I know is a theory people have, whether there is no Glenn and it is Ben Glenroy and that he is, traumatized from being poisoned by rat poison or whatever it may be, that Ben Glenroy, Glenn Stubbins, is actually the murderer, and that this all sparked from last season and wanting to get revenge for, you know, the show being destroyed and Ben Glenroy being murdered. So I definitely think it has to do with a person being crazy or not being able to grasp reality, because that's been such a big theme this season. And like I said, Glenn clearly shows a lot of those traits of inability to grasp reality. I think also he's one of the only characters that we don't know that well. He did narrate an episode, but we didn't really get to know him. He spoke more about SAZZ and stunt people as a whole in that episode than he did about himself and himself as a character. So I think it's very possible that he has come into this season to be the murderer. I think also maybe the reason I think it's one of the twins is because I think the two twins together is too obvious, because they've just put that out this episode. What if Tawny, the twin that was wearing the boots this episode, the one that we're assuming is the shooter because she has the shoes on, what if Trina is the same shoe size and she borrowed those shoes from her sister? Or what if they just own the same pair of boots because they are twins and they like to coordinate outfits together? And so Trina is actually in this relationship with Glenn Stubbins. She's in love with him, and so they performed this murder together. She took the shot from the Dudenoff apartment and he cleaned up the body, and she was just the support for his idea. Possibly, right? Possibly? So that is kind of the theory that I have right now. I'm thinking it's Glenn Stubbins and Trina brothers. Obviously I could be wrong, you never know, but right now I think that Marshall is too obvious, especially with that comment about his vision and the idea that he would be able to shoot that far. It's too obvious. It's too obvious. I'm still waiting to see what the secondary mystery is this season. We almost always have something else going on. So we've talked about it before, but the first season, it wasn't just the death of Tim Kono. It was also what happened to Zoe all those years ago, who killed her. And that led into figuring out the fact that the Demases were grave robbers. And I think that there's going to be something like that this season. We've got the murder of SAZZ. Now we're trying to figure out if SAZZ was the intended target or if it was actually Charles. But I think that there's going to be some other bigger element going on. Like I said, we've had a lot of discussion of animals. Is there going to be some sort of black market animal business going on? Is there going to be something every time the Westies get a ham from Dudenoff, there's something hidden within it? There's got to be some other plot going on, some other secret that we're going to learn in episode 7 or 8, and it's really going to round out the season. Well, I'm very excited to see where this season goes. I am enjoying it so far. I don't know, it's just the perfect little fall show to watch. It's so cozy and fun. But if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all those YouTube-y things. I love you guys literally so much. Subscribing, sharing, commenting, liking, all those things really help my channel to grow. And that's the goal for me this year. I hope you guys are enjoying the season 2. Let me know if you like it so far. And I will see you guys next week with another video. Bye guys.